What's up guys, GrimXV here, bringing you another vrising video. So in today's video, we are going to be showing you my thought process and what I consider when I make a build. Now the builds I'm going to make are going to be PVE builds, and we're going to be using all tier 1 and 2 spells, just so that you can get your hands on this as early as possible. So the first thing I always consider, or I guess let me go ahead and show you which bosses we're going to need to do this. So the bosses we're going to need to unlock this, we're going to need to get Arrow. He's going to give us a T1 Chaos spell point. We're going to need to get Goreswine for a T1 Holy. And then we're going to need to get, for one of the builds, we'll need to get Clive for a T2 Chaos spell. So to kind of explain the thought process here, and I will go ahead and tell you who we're going to get the dash from as well, which will be Meredith, because she's the easiest one to get it from in Act 2, aside from the blood dash there with Beatrice. But whenever I play PvE, I always do kind of like this trifecta synergy thing. It's actually what you saw working so well in my mosquito farm video. And what that essentially is, I just merged the benefits of Unholy Magic, Storm, and Chaos Magic. So for the physical portion of the build, when we take out Arrow, we're going to pick up Power Surge. And then when we take out Goreswine, we're going to pick up Ward of the Damned. And then of course from Meredith, we will have the T4 dash. And then for the caster build for PvE, we're actually going to do the Corrupted Skull from Goreswine. And then when we take out Clive, we will get the Chaos Barrier for T2. And then of course when you kill Quincy, both builds will use the ult as well. So that'll be the two builds, and we're going to start with the physical one first and kind of talk about the strengths and weaknesses of this. So the reason why this build is so good, let me just get a weapon here to showcase. So we will do today's video with the Twin Blade. I had someone request kind of a Twin Blade build, and this definitely applies. Said they were having some trouble with the Twin Blade getting it to work, but I think it is a very strong weapon. So the reason why this build comes online so early is because of Power Surge. So Power Surge is going to inflict Ignite to anyone you attack. It gives you some movement speed, some attack speed, and then what's really great is the pop effect. So it triggers an explosion that deals 50% magic damage whenever an enemy affected by Ignite perishes, and this can have a chain reaction. So the way I would use this with Twin Blade, pop your Power Surge, throw out your E, or your Q rather, and then it's going to go through all the mobs, and then you just auto attack. And that is going to be enough to get that chain reaction kind of just popping and going there. Now for bossing, that same method will still apply, but the only thing we're going to do different is we're going to charge at them with this. And you can do this on mobs as well. But you'll charge at them with Ward of the Damned, and then if they don't hit your shield, you're going to recast it to apply that stack of Condemn there. And what Condemn is doing is making them take 15% more damage. So the idea is you get your 15% more damage Condemn on them, throw out the Q for Twin Blade, and then that's going to call back to you and do a ton of damage. Now of course you don't need to use Twin Blade. You can also use axes. Axes work extremely well with this. Spear does as well. Pretty much any weapon that has an ability that can hit multiple enemies is going to excel with this and get you those really nice pops for all of the packs. Now when we get tier 4 and we get static dash or the storm dash added onto this, that's when our damage is going to get even higher. And at that point, for bossing with the Twin Blade, what we want to do is pop it, go in, get the dash effect applied, and just start auto attacking. And the really neat thing about Twin Blade, whenever you have static applied to a target, each one of those swipes that it does with the left click is going to apply that static effect from Storm. So what Storm does is it'll trigger a shock that deals 10% magic damage per physical instance. So whenever you deal physical damage to them, there'll be an extra 10% magic damage on top of that. And each one of these hits applies that 10% damage. So you're getting 20% damage from one auto there. So it is really strong. And I like that one a lot actually. So that is the core setup of the physical, and I will show you guys some overlaid clips of me just kind of using this in low level. Like I say, you can get the first part of this on as early as Farbane, and it is very strong. I love bossing with this, and just it makes Farbane Act 1 just so fast. Now for the other version, just to quickly look at the ranged variant, and you do have some options there as well. So let's say you don't want to do Corrupted Skull with this. The reason why I suggest Corrupted Skull is just because of these ads. It makes doing things like fighting bosses and everything else just really simple, because they will just focus on the ads, and you can kind of, as a caster, you can hang back and just kind of attack them with a ranged weapon, whether it be a crossbow, longbow, or the daggers, and it's pretty risk-free. But if you don't want that and you want some sort of like aggressive method to apply the Chaos Volley or the Ignite there, you could swap out Chaos Volley instead and do this setup. And Chaos Volley is a very strong and highly mobile projectile as well, so this could also work. This is also going to be pretty decent in PvP. The Power Surge can be decent in PvP as well, but just like most physical builds, you're going to want some type of knowledge of weapon swapping when you get into Iron. But for the purpose of this video, we're going to stick with what I said earlier and go with this. Now the way this one would work, you're going to be kind of finding from range. Here, let me grab a ranged weapon so I can showcase that. Now the ranged weapon I recommend for this, if you're not using a crossbow or a longbow, I recommend grabbing some daggers. And you can get these in Act 2. You actually get both of these weapons in Act 2. The Twin Blade, I believe, is unlocked off of the new boss in the arena, in the Coliseum. And then the Iron Daggers are unlocked off of Bane now in Act 2. But the reason why I like these a lot is because that does a ton of damage. And if you're kind of throwing out spells, it's really easy just to get down a bunch of damage on a boss and then call that back. These are great for early game bosses, guys. Like early to mid game, these things do wonders. So that's the whole concept of the build. You're going to be throwing that out, using that to empower the damage from your Q. And now on mob packs, you're just going to be sending one of those every once in a while. Now the way that Chaos Barrier works here, whenever you take a damage, or whenever a mob hits you and you actually block it, it's going to get charges and do more damage. So you can block up to 5 attacks with Chaos Barrier, and then that's going to make that Q, or that recast, pop even harder. And I should have mentioned as well, Ward of the Dam is going to spawn a skeleton whenever a mob hits that, so that's how you're getting the mitigation there that we have here with Corrupted Skull when you're doing the physical build. And same thing kind of applies here. Now as a caster, whenever you're doing the static apply on bosses, you just dash and send your auto. So whenever you dash and do a veil attack, it'll apply to both your ranged and your physical weapons, as long as you land that auto. Now if you're doing this and you don't see it land, that's because you missed your first auto, so you want to make sure you hold that to make that shot count. Yeah, so that's really all the build is. Just kind of, recasting that. Don't miss like I did. And then you want to make sure you have that static on your recall and any daggers you hit for that extra damage. Now, that said, now we're going to look at how we would scale that to the end game. And the reason I want to say one thing here, because I think there's a lot of people kind of getting overwhelmed because we do have access to early armor sets early on and all that. And guys, you can absolutely use that stuff, but I don't want you to think it's necessary. It is not necessary to try to min-max all of your gear for all these early game armor sets like the Templar and all that, and the Blood Chest Guard and the Dark Magus, unless you're doing like a try-hard high, like a brutal mode on like crazy custom settings type of run. You're going to progress past that point way faster than you can actually even get the research unlocked and use this armor for. So what happens a lot of times with me on my playthroughs, I will actually just use Holofang. So I will go from, let me get the bench so I can tell you exactly what the name of that is. So the way we do this in most of my playthroughs, I will get the plated bone guard and wear that along with usually a refined weapon, or sometimes if I'm doing the lumber mill strat, I'll skip that and go straight to a copper. Then we get Keeley and we unlock the Night Stalker vest and leggings, and that is pretty much all we have until we get into Iron. This is enough right here, along with a copper weapon and a Gravedigger ring to actually do Bear and Quincy solo. So you don't do any of this. Now, if you just have the mats and you're spending time PvPing there, then go for it. But it's not required for progression at all. So once we have that, we'll skip that. We'll start getting iron and things like, we'll get Beatrice and then start getting cotton and wool thread in Act 2. And then we'll use that to make the Hollow Fang set. And just like before, we kind of stick in the Hollow Fang set until we, get research for these by chance. Now, I will say something that is nice here, whenever I am crafting gear, is just to pick up a 2-piece of the Duskwatcher set. And no particular reason for the stats. We don't really care about the crit chance because we're not scaling it that well. All we want there is the movement speed, because that movement speed does help us a little bit whenever we're traversing. So 3% doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it does start to add up. Now, necklace wise, let me see. So when it comes to necklaces early game, like I say, we'll usually go to the Bloodbone ring after we get out of the quest area, and then we'll go to Gravedigger. And I don't ever really build these unless I am, like I say, spending a prolonged time in the new zone or in the Act 1 zone PvPing. What I will do is I will actually go pick up the Shadow Priestess. So my pathing route for this is, as soon as I have iron and my Hollow Fang set for gear, I'll still have my Gravedigger ring, but after that I will go immediately and kill the Shadow Priestess to unlock the pendant. And once you have her defeated, you unlock the pendant and this station here. A really easy way to get some Scourge Stone to make that quickly is to do chest runs in this Delhi Monastery. So when you come into Delhi Monastery, you don't need a potion. You just run through and ignore the mobs. There's a chest right here and here. There's also one here and then one on the backside here. And usually you do a couple of runs of that, or maybe, and you'll get it quickly. And then outside of that, you can also just craft it in your base as well. It's not that expensive to do. It just takes whetstone and then some grave dust to get that going in your base. So after that, where we do start to build a necklace is right here, because we are going to need this to kind of get through some of the mid game before we can get our Blood Merlot. Now, a couple options here. If you are, whether you're physical or mage, I would suggest either getting the Warrior Pendant, or you could do the Duskwatcher or the Dawn Runner. Now, I'm going to talk about the benefits of each really quick. So the reason why the Warrior Pendant is good is just because it's going to give you that 8% weapon skill power. So that's going to increase the damage you're doing with your weapons, and it is a fairly large portion of the damage you do at this stage of the game. So that's why that is useful. The Leech, we don't really care too much about the Leech because the value of Leech isn't that great in this game. It'll help you out some, but it's really just less impactful than what you could go for overall for other areas. The reason why we consider the Duskwatcher is because we have a chance to imply static. So the attack speed is definitely nice there as well, but the big one there is the static inflict. So as we're going around kind of passively poking things with the spear or our throwing daggers or whatever you're using, having that chance to apply static just makes our damage just kind of naturally scale in a nice way. So I really like doing the Duskwatcher there whenever I have the knowledge for it. And then the final option is going to be the Dawn Runner, and again, that's just to give us the movement speed. So this will actually stack with our 2-piece Duskwatcher if you go for that, to bring us up to 7 there. So those are the options, and like I said, you can really go for any one of these and be fine. Usually it dictates or depends on what you have unlocked for research. But if you do have a choice, I would say one of these 3. Now, if you're forced to go with some of these, it's not the end of the world. It's not going to impact what you need to do to progress at all, and you'll get out of that Act 2 and 3 stages of the game fairly easily, even if you have those. All right. So that said, let's get into some build options for these builds, and they're going to be partially the same. So I'm going to start with my physical build first and tell you what options you have there. So as you move into, well, you're probably not going to go straight to Dracula here, but as you move into the end game, you're going to start getting research and start wanting to specialize your armor at this point. And I'll talk about the strengths and weaknesses of each. So Shadow Moon, this one is really strong in particular, especially when you get it to Drac, just because you have that bonus movement speed. What makes the Dracula set best when you get that upgraded is the dash, the extra movement speed on your veil there. So whenever you dash, you're going to have that burst of speed, and it is actually going to be more impactful than you might otherwise think on paper. So whenever you're chasing someone or getting chased or even just naturally kind of fighting through mobs, this comes into play very nicely. And of course that upgrades from the Shadow Moon set. Now the Grim Knight armor, This is your DR set. This is going to be for anyone that wants to be just a little bit more tanky. It also gives you some nice attack speed. For a overall well-rounded armor, I think Grim is very good here. And no, that's not me being biased because it's called Grim. It is actually very good. Because that DR is very impactful, and then the attack speed just kind of helps with some tempo and things like that whenever you're in combat, especially if you're using a ranged weapon. And that, of course, goes up into the Dracula's Grim, where you get more HP and attack speed for your Veil. Now, the more HP isn't really that crazy, but the attack speed is, because that's actually also going to increase the attack speed of our daggers. So whenever we're trying to land our Veil attacks from range, you know, that's going to help us just get those out that much quicker and get them down range. After that, we have, where is the, I must not have it, oh, there it is. We have the Maleficer, almost stumbled over that one. This is the Mage set. It's going to give you some CDR, some Spell Leech, and then a gear level. So, this set is one I actually don't build a whole lot. This is what we would want to consider on the table for our caster build, and this is just going to give us the most damage on our spells. I would say more so if you opted to do the volley set, then you might consider this. But yeah, I typically don't really build this. Maybe it's because I play more hybrid builds, but I don't really get a lot of use out of this. But one interesting thing for this is that you do get the spell crate on your dash. So you could dash, cast out a spell, and just have it hit that much harder. So that is a nice aspect. And then of course the CDR and the Leech are nice as well. And then lastly, we have the Grim Knight set. So this is going to give you some primary attack speed, some damage reduction, or the Dread set is what we wanted to look at there. So this is going to give you weapon power, weapon cooldown, and then that level. This one here is another one that I think is very strong, especially when you do specialized build around dashes. When you get to the end game, because of that stat line there with your Veil attacks dealing 30% more damage. That is very interesting to play around with as well. You can do some kind of quirky specialized builds where you're just dashing in and playing around that and doing a punch of damage. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, Grim, all that's good to know, but what the heck am I going to do for these builds? Well, for the physical build, I'm actually going to be going with the Shadow Moon, because we want to prioritize our movement speed as much as possible. That is going to help us just kind of flow through combat naturally, get dodge attacks and those kind of things. I think that's something people don't consider. You know, instead of just using your spells to block things, you want to be dodging and sidestepping things as well. And then for the ranged version, I'm going to recommend you use the Grim Knight set. Now, I know this isn't the caster set, but something you'll see as we kind of get deeper into this, you don't really need the caster stats. There's really only really where you make up your stats with that are on your weapon and your blood. So we'll talk about that when we get into it there. So that's what I would build. Now for necklaces, just to show you that. For the physical here, I would probably pick up the, actually for both of these, I would probably pick up the Blade Master. I don't think the Unyielding Charger is as strong as it once was, especially since that skeleton can be kind of annoying for like PvP. But having that occasional static proc is going to scale your damage a lot as you're just fighting naturally. So we're going to use that for both builds. And I'm actually not going to craft that because I've got one already made over here. So this would be your pretty much setup, you know, for either build. You'd either have the Grim set if you're doing the ranged, or the Shadow Moon if you're doing the melee, and that would take you into the end game. Now, whenever you're making Dark Silver, you know, you just make one Dark Silver weapon of your choice, and that'll be enough to actually kill the boss. And both of these builds will kill Matka at level 70 with just the, with just the Dawnthorn. And I will show you that kind of later on in the video as well, so I'll go ahead and grab that. Now for in-game optimization here, like I say, we are going to be having the Dread set eventually with this, and then also the Grim set. We're going to keep this necklace as well. So bloods, let's talk about bloods. The blood I recommend for the physical version of the build is going to be, so if you want kind of just more damage, I recommend doing Rogue with Warrior. And specifically what we take here, we're going to be taking the tier 1 passive from Rogue, or excuse me, from Warrior. That's just going to give us some extra physical power and then also make our Veil attacks deal more damage. The weapon power is not really necessary, but there is a honorable mention that you could go there. But because we're using the Rogue armor, we're going to be primarily focusing on getting our crit chance stacked from the primary blood. But you can do either. Just if you do decide to do the weapon power, just understand that you will need to make sure you get that somewhere on your weapons as well. But for this video, we're going to take this. Now for passives,
delicious.
For our passives, what we're going to you're not going to take this. This is just what I had earlier. Let me get rid of this kinda really quick. And before we move on to passives, let me go ahead and just actually also explain what I would do for a caster build. For a caster build, I would of course run Draculin Scholar. Now you can, this is all preference, guys. You can vary, change this however you want and it'll be fine. But I would suggest putting Draculin first and then Scholar second. And that's just because the crit damage you get from Draculin along with the cool effects with the movement speed are just going to scale your damage that much more. Draculin Blood is really all you need to bring a caster build online. It is going to do so much damage, that or Scholar, honestly. But for this build in particular, what I would take, you have a couple options. You can either do your ultimate there, or you could do spell cooldown and shielding. What I would probably do is not the tier 2. I would probably either choose the tier 1 or the tier 3 here. And really all we want from that tier 1 is the 14% increased spell power, and the tier 3 we just want the spell cooldown reset. So that's probably what we're going to go for here. The spell cooldown, whenever you use your ultimate, you're going to reset all of your spells. And also, you get 20% more damage on your ultimate. Now, I didn't talk about that either. Really quick, sorry, before we get into the passives, for the physical build, you're going to pick up Heart Strike. This is very strong for clearing mobs. For the caster build, you're going to want to pick up probably Volatile Arachnid. This is going to be crazy damage for mobs whenever you are scaling your damage there for caster builds, your spell damage. There we go. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Now, passives. The passive I recommend each build run is Dark Enchantment. So we're gonna talk about the tanky options first. Dark Enchantment is almost a must-have in my mind at this point. This is gonna give you 4% damage reduction. This is gonna also give you a shield, a very strong shield, whenever you get lower than 30% of your HP. And this includes whenever you get knocked out of a golem. So for that reason alone, I think this is awesome. Now, an honorable mention, something else you consider is Bastion. So this is going to give you 8%, increase the max HP, and then it's going to reduce the damage you take when crowd controlled by 25%. So what this means is that if you get caught in a incoming spear queue, or if someone incaps you with like an axe or a slasher and then follows up with a spear queue, that is going to be a lot less damage that you take in that combo. I don't think this one is strictly necessary, but it is worth mentioning for those that feel like they are too squishy. All right, now because these are early game builds, or intended to be, we're going to be using mostly the Elemental Awakenings here. We're going to be using some of those to bring the build online, and then I'll tell you which ones I think are best for the Vampire Awakenings. So for the physical build, really kind of both builds. Something that I always like using is the Lightning Fast Strikes, because that attack speed is very nice. It just kind of adds some extra flow to your build, and then the statics dealing 20% increased damage is nice as well. So that means you're going to be dealing 30% damage with those static procs, which is kind of insane. I think a lot of people overlook that, but it is very strong. Now, other than that, what you want to pick up is the Chaos Kindling. So what this does is, yes, it gives you some cooldown and it makes your knight deal more damage. But the big thing here is that your chaos explosions will ignite enemies. So this is how you get some of those massive chain reactions. So you'll ignite someone, inflicting it, they'll explode and deal chaos damage, and then it'll just keep infecting the entire pack. So this is very nice for both builds to help you with PVE clearing. You don't really need to use Renewing Flames. It doesn't heal you a whole lot. You can, but I don't really think that is necessary. Really, for this build, early on, I would say these two are all you need for either builds to just do fine in progressing. You don't need much more. Now, as we're fleshing things out for the end game, we do have some additional options. I personally always like Turbulent Velocity. Again, just kind of prioritizing that movement speed to make sure we're not getting caught out in awkward situations in open world, or so that we can, dodge our boss abilities that much easier. So I would suggest that for both builds. And then we have some variation here for the last one. We can do, for the physical build, I would probably recommend Lethal Strikes. This is going to give you 8% increased physical power or critical power, and then have you do 12% increased physical damage to enemies below 30%. So it's going to help you with that execute. Another thing you can do is also pick up Rampage. If you're lacking a little bit of crit chance, you could also pick this up, and that's going to give you 12% increased attack speed on your attacks as well, which is very nice. And really, those two I think would be what I would consider for this. Overpower is an honorable mention. This is going to give you some cooldown rate and some weapon charges, but unless you're leaning into the warrior side, you don't really get a whole lot of value out of this. I don't think this is going to be too good unless you stack it with the warrior charges that you get. And then Ravenous Strikes can be good as well if you decided to lean into the weapon skill power side of things. So for this one, you do have kind of a flexible slot. Now, you ask me what my options would be. We could look at some things like Pharaoh Haste. We could look at Bastion. Or we could look at things like Sanguine Mastery or even Cold Soul. And where these two would come into play would be with the weapon coatings. So you could run some frost coatings just to make sure you get the 8% increased damage there to chill to frozen targets. Or you could run the blood coating and get the 8% increased physical damage to enemies affected by leech, and then also increase your blood effect. I'm going to go ahead and say do this one because these are mostly PVE targeted builds. Having that blood coating on your weapon to spawn the blood orb to get you some HP is just going to be that much more crazy. And let me show you what I mean by that. So this is what the blood coating does. I'll leave that on the screen for a second so you can look at it. Some other honorable mentions would be the storm coating, just to make sure you have static applied that much more often, and then also the chaos coating for the same reason. These three would be what I would consider the most. But why this is good is for PvE is because as you're fighting, you're gonna see this pop, and then you get a health orb back. So this is just gonna help you naturally kind of stay topped up in the fight. So not only will you get healed from your Veil attack, but you'll get healed from that as well. And then it's gonna increase our damage, our PvE damage that we do too. So very, very strong. Now, if you're wondering what I would do for the mage version of this, kind of the same, because we are still going to be using our daggers. That's kind of the thing with this game. There is, whenever you're playing a caster, you are going to have some sort of physical involved, and getting things like static to increase our weapon damage from our daggers is going to be very strong, especially when bossing. Bossing, it makes a huge difference because you're getting that damage down and applied in between your spell cooldown. Now, if you don't want to do that, if you're just not liking the way that sounds, you're like, Grim, you're crazy, get out of here, dude. What are you talking about? What I would do, let's see here. Got a couple options. Conductivity, enhanced conductivity isn't bad. It's going to give you 7% more spell power, and it's going to also have your spells inflict static. So I would probably consider picking that up. I do think you would want Chaos Kindling and the Lightning Fast Strikes for both builds. I think I mentioned that, but alternatively, if you don't want Lightning Fast Strikes as a caster, you could do this for your two-man setup, because this is also very good. I would still pick up the Sanguine Mastery just to keep our sustain up. And then at the end here, the only Vampire Awakening ability or passive that pertains to kind of caster builds is Wicked Power. And this gives you some spell crit chance, and also gives you a chance to inflict a random effect from your spells. I haven't played around with this too much, guys, but I can see it being very good. So what that would mean is, as we're throwing out our Corrupted Skulls here, not only are they going to be inflicting Condemn, but they're also going to be having a chance to apply Ignite and apply our static effect to mobs, just making it kind of flow that much easier. Alright, so that would be my two considerations there for passives. Now, when it comes to things like spell jewels, I am going to tell you which jewels I think are best for each. I'll actually pop those on the screen. And I'll also show you which weapon stats I think are best. Now, I do want to mention that if you want to play around with these, you have two options to kind of get your hands on the information beforehand. There is a spreadsheet, or a couple options actually. There's a spreadsheet called vrising database that I will link in the description below. It is still being updated with Act 2 stuff, or with 1.1 stuff, but it is a very, very useful tool. It's created by Vin and El Bandito. They are working on getting that updated so that you guys can, my alarm still went off, so that you guys can have a visual without having to jump on a different server there. So that'll be online probably within, you know, they're pretty quick. I don't know what definite time, but you know, they're working on that, getting that done. The next option is you could come into a custom server, kind of like I do, and use admin commands, and I will post all of the commands that I use that are relevant in the description below, so that you can kind of play around with these on your own. And you know, that's just, you have to enable console in your settings, and then you'll type those commands in and kind of follow the prompts from there. And then the third resource, and the easiest, or easiest and readiest available now, is the vArena dual server. Now this is a PvP practice server that I'm a part of the I'm part of the staff members there. I'm a part of the admin team, and it is a useful tool for new players and anyone that wants to improve in PvP. But you can also get on there and now start experimenting with your builds, looking at jewel effects and those kind of things. So those are the useful tools. Now I'm going to leave some space at the end of the video just to go over what I think preferred stats are. And I think we may call it there, guys. So didn't want to make this one too long, but hopefully you did get some useful information out of this. Now, if I did not cover something you wanted, or if you want me to expand on something, please let me know in the comments below. If you just don't gel with this format and you say, Grim, you're going too fast, you're bouncing all over, do it again. Let me know that too, and I will be more than happy to help you guys out. But that is going to be it for this video, guys. As always, thank you so much for watching. This is GrimXV, signing off.